You're a quorum. We are back here in Ways and Means. We are continuing our testimony on education finance and modeling homestead exemption proposals. Julia, I think you were mid-presentation when we took a break, and let's jump back in.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Julia Richter, JFO. Mid-presentation, we're talking about the property tax credit, changes to income sensitivity. And we just talked about how it's complex and how it's a tax expenditure and how the modeling is complex because it's iterative. So getting back into things, I have included this slide here in terms of modeling assumptions to set the stage. So first of all, I know the chair mentioned this before the break, but I will mention it again very explicitly that this is not a policy proposal that I'm modeling. I am modeling this to explain results and intuition of changes to the property tax credit. So from my training, generally when I'm asked to explore something, the first step is to kind of look at the extremes and look at the bounds and figure out what are sort of the furthest ways that we can take something. And then policymakers can ask questions to move into one direction or another. So this is to help understand some of those bounds. The modeling, as we've talked about, is complex. It necessitates multiple assumptions regarding the mechanics and the levers at play. So I want to call out a few of the assumptions that I've made in the background of the modeling. One is we're only looking at the filers who qualified for or who may have qualified for a property tax credit in fiscal year 2025. So we're not looking at all property taxpayers. We're not looking at all homestead taxpayers. We're looking at households with incomes up to that threshold of $115,000. I'll talk about why that is in a couple of slides. Second, I'm ignoring the lag of the property tax credit and assuming that the property tax credit earned in FY25 is also applying to FY25 bills. As we know, this isn't taxpayer experience, but this is a way of getting at the actual estimated liability for the taxpayer in FY25. And I know I say this pretty much all the time I present modeling, but we're assuming everything else is held equal. And that the only changes are the changes that I am noting. So moving into what we're looking at here. So this is what we were just talking about on the previous slide, that we're looking at only the households with an estimated income under $115,000 for the purpose of calculating the FY25 property tax credit. Why are we only looking at them? A number of reasons, but the primary one is that households that are above that threshold, above the $115,000, do not qualify for a property tax credit. So they may not submit their household income to the tax department. In this case, when this means that the data is incomplete for the households greater than 115,000, right? Because not all of those households are submitting their income data. So we would need to work with the tax department to get the income data for those households with a greater income. So essentially what it is, you file your homestead declaration. Everyone who owns a homestead, in essence, should be filing a homestead declaration. In that homestead declaration, it says, if you have a household income of $115,000 or less, you may qualify for a property tax credit. Tell us your household income. And that data is submitted to the tax department and compiled there. For households above $115,000, they're still submitting that homestead declaration, but they're not submitting their income in that form because they're not going to qualify for a property tax credit. So there's no reason to do that additional paperwork. So that's why we have an incomplete data set for above 115,000.
So, and I know that, so in sort of previous attempts to model things like this in past years, did you use AGI, and does the tax department match AGI data to properties? And then what happens from there? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so in previous years, when this modeling has been done, I'm thinking back to a ton of modeling that we did for the Income-Based Education Tax Study Committee. Essentially what it does is it's a pretty big lift for the tax department, and they take AGI data, try to calculate some sort of equivalent of household income, right? Because we know AGI is different than household income. Household income essentially is all the income of everyone living under that roof, and tries to crosswalk that data for households greater than 115,000 against their homestead declaration form to create this like master file with this crosswalk data. It's a lot of work for the tax department. And the data that we were using from a couple years ago to do this modeling was from back, I think it was like 2020 data. It was an old file. So I determined at this point in time, let's use the better data for now for this modeling. And then if we were to explore it further, then that would be a request for the tax department to create this big crosswalked file. I don't have all of that data. I just have the 115,000 and below. I also have the homestead declaration data, but I have carved those folks out because it's not reliable above 115. So anyways, so that's sort of the world that we're living in when we're looking at these changes in liabilities. The table that I have here is structured in the same way that I've structured all of the tables in this slide deck. So essentially the way to read it is we're seeing here household income group, right? So this is the group we're talking about, household income. These are the same or similar groupings that the tax department used for the purpose of presenting their modeling. I want to note that not all of the baskets are the same size. So typically, we've got 0 to 25, 25 to 47. It's not the same distance between those parameters. Generally, I try to have the same size baskets, but these correspond with what we have in current law, and I'm also going with them so it's more consistent with the tax department modeling. But I want to call that out. So what we're looking at here is the household income group up to 115,000. And what we're looking at here is the equalized house site value group. So we're not looking at homestead value, we're looking at solely house site. So that's the principal dwelling and the surrounding 2 acres. And the reason we're looking at house site is because that is what the property tax credit is calculated against.
Why is the 47 to 75? Is that just an arbitrary midpoint between 47 to 90?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And the same with the house site value groups. Again, I want to note that these are not the same size baskets, but I'm doing them so that I'm consistent with tax. So what we're looking at here is the estimated number of house sites in each one of these buckets, so to speak. So here we see that there's estimated to be about 2,100 households that have an income, but a household income between 0 and 25,000, and a house site value between 0 and 100,000. Here we have 27,000 house sites between this income and this house site value. So that's how we're reading this table. This is reflecting counts. And so this is the population that we're looking at in the modeling. Well, I think I said this, but I'll say it again. It's obvious, but I want to say it out loud. These are rounded, so it's easier to look at. Rounded to the nearest 100. I've rounded in this presentation, but the actual data is not this clean. And then a final note. I know I've said this, but preliminary estimates, it's really aiming to provide a sense of scale and intuition, but the work could be refined with further analysis and more digging and more of those iterations. But this still will provide the general intuition, scale, scope.
So do we know how many house sites there are in total for
So,
all income groups? Or at all house site value?
yeah, so the file that I'm working with has around 170,000.
That's just primary homes though, homestead.
Yeah, this is the homestead declaration file. So there's around 170,000 entries. However, that does not mean necessarily that there's 170,000 house sites. There are data inconsistencies in the file included in there. So there are some folks that are double counted, or there's some folks who may have submitted a homestead declaration who are not actually should be submitting a homestead declaration. For instance, they may be a dependent, or they may be selling their home and submitting it because they don't know better or out of an abundance of caution. So that's kind of like our upper bound. It's going to be lower than that. How much lower, I don't know, but I can try to dig into that.
Well, I just, is 170,000 approximately right? And we've got 105,000 here that fall into these categories.
Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark.
It's a-
Yeah. During this testimony, I'll be using the word approximate more than normal.
I think.
So those are my caveats. For the folks who may have missed the preliminary assumption slide, I'll just note, we're talking really about, we're using a number of assumptions. We're holding all else equal. We're only looking at households with household incomes up to 115,000. I mean, we haven't gotten into the deep modeling of the results, so you really just missed the assumptions. So moving into the meat of what I'm presenting here today. So talking about this first case is looking at this far extreme bound. What would it look like if there was no income sensitivity in fiscal year 2025? And this is a way to get a sense of how does this tax expenditure impact folks' liabilities, their bills. I'm using the term liability, but you can essentially think of that as how much somebody is paying. So this provides a basis to begin an analysis. We talked about the cost of the tax expenditure amount of the property tax credit in the education fund. So this means we know that the property tax credit is about 153 million. So if there was no income sensitivity, then this would be 153 million less that wouldn't need to be raised by property taxes, all else equal. Right? The way that 153 million shakes out, it could be used to only apply to homestead rates, only apply to non-homestead rates, apply to some combination of the two. And so to estimate what it would look like if there were no income sensitivity in FY25, I went through 3 steps. I went back into the FY25 yield model, and then used that 153 million got rid of the property tax credit, and then used the 153 million to lower property tax rates. I then used those new rates and calculated a new liability for all of the filers. And then I compared I had already calculated their current law liability. So then I compared their current liability, their current law bill, if the credit were to have been applied in FY25 against what their bill would be if there was no credit, but also they had the lower tax rates. And that's what we're going to look at now.
Now, Julie, just when you say the 2025 fiscal year, that 153 million, I mean, the 2025, oh, okay, was 168, but that's a different figure being used, right? The 168 million?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason that is different is because you'll see the 153 in FY26 when you look at the property tax credit line.
Okay.
And that's because the property tax credit is on a lag. So you see, when you look at the Ed Fund outlook, you see the 153 million in FY 26 because that was what was earned in FY 25, but then is applying to FY 26 bills. And one of the assumptions that I'm making in this analysis is we're pretending that there is no lag and that the credit is applied in the year that it's earned. And the reason for doing that is that we can have a more apples to apples comparison of the change in liability. So it's not what it would look like on the bill, but it's what it would look like if there were no lag. We're just looking at the actual bill.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. For some reason, here are some more assumptions. We already walked through these. But it doesn't hurt to see them again. Okay. This is what we just talked through. Okay, so this is the first piece I did. I said, okay, we're getting rid of the 153 million property tax credit that we're assuming is applied in FY 25. And we're going to use that 153 million to uniformly reduce the homestead property tax bill and the non-homestead property tax bill. Solved for those rates. And then I recalculated what that liability would be. What we're seeing here in the table is the average difference in liability between the current law liability in FY 25 and what the liability or the bill would be without any income sensitivity. So this is not the total bill. This is the difference in bills that we're looking at here. So I have highlighted in blue those groups that would see a decrease in their liability in their bill, estimated decrease in the average change if there were no income sensitivity. Those in white would see an increase. So what we're seeing here,
And again, not a proposal, just working through towards understanding how a proposal would be formed.
yes, this is my math brain. This is showing you the furthest extreme.
So, wouldn't people earning above 115 did not apply for income sensitivity, wouldn't they save some money too? Because they're
Yes.
picking up the tab at this point.
Yes.
Do we know how much they would save?
No, so and the reason why is because, so twofold. Yes, they would see a change in liability. My modeling here is only looking at household incomes up to 115,000. And the reason for doing that is because the data for 115, above 115,000 it's an incomplete data set because folks who will not qualify for the property tax credit are not going to be submitting to the tax department on their homestead declaration form what their household income is.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah,
So
okay, but wouldn't they know through other sources though, what the income is?
we could have a proxy for that. The household income is a specific definition that's used solely for the purpose of calculating the property tax credit. And
We covered this when we first started testimony, but the income, there was a data match that the tax department created with JFO for the income-based education tax study. And so if folks wanna, that's one of the reasons I keep on referring people back to that report. It's not because I have any income-based education tax move. It's just that data set was the last time there was sort of those two data sets were matched. But a lot of imputing has to happen, a lot of assumptions have to happen because the definitions are so different between AGI and household income.
You know, Madam Chair, I was thinking if we left that group alone, it didn't give them the reduction, you might argue that they are entitled to, but left it alone. Because they are a group that, however we define this, may have greater ability to pay. So leave that group alone and apply the savings to this this group up to 115.
For the buy down or for tax credits?
By the buy down,
For the general
so-
fund transfer?
well, both.
Okay,
Uh,
great. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Like to-
And I think that's what I think that maybe we can understand a little bit more about that. We're not really going anywhere with this presentation. We're just understanding what we would need to know to go somewhere.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go there or not, but it did occur to me that that is a way, it's a path.
Yep. Yes.
We're not fully going there, kind of providing some insight to that. One thing that I would flag when thinking about the buy down, is if the intent would be to reduce the rates for a certain group of taxpayers based off of their income, and then have a different set of rates for taxpayers with a higher income. Administratively, I don't know if that's, I don't think it is. I would defer to the tax department. I don't know if that's feasible.
But we could put more resources into the income yield than we did into the other yield. Oh, but then all those people in that other corner would have a problem.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I
I know it's the reverse on your corner.
this corner,
Yeah. No, I meant that.
this corner?
I was thinking that corner. Doesn't that cause a problem for that corner? Because those folks don't pay on income either, right?
So,
Anyway, continue on with your presentation.
okay,
Oh, sorry, Representative Feltus had a question before.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand what we've done here so far. That even if we lower the rates by not having the 153 million in credits, so that means the whole rate goes down. The households that are in the white section, they would still be paying more than they do now.
exactly, exactly.
Okay,
And the amount that they
even
would,
though the rate's lower, they're still going to be paying more than they were before.
precisely,
Okay.
precisely. And the reason for doing that is because we have this property tax credit that's tiered based off of household income, right? So we know that up to 47,000, and we'll get into the circuit breaker, they're only paying a certain percentage of their income. So essentially the way to interpret any of these is saying, okay, looking at this number right here, can you see when I highlight? Oh, okay. So looking at this number right here, essentially the way to read this is,
Can you just hover over it with your mouse instead of highlighting?
okay, this one,
Yes, thank you.
the 2760. The way to interpret this is saying, okay, for a household with a household income between 0 and 25,000, and a house site value between 25,000 and 300,000 when equalized. Right, we're looking at these two parameters here. If we were to do away with the property tax credit and give that tax expenditure back to lowering rates uniformly, this group would see an average increase in their bill of approximately $2,760 on top of what they are paying under current law.
All things being equal.
All things being equal, we're applying the property tax credit in FY 25, all of the caveats we've walked through, but yes, all things equal. Thank you.
So in doing this exercise, is what maybe we're looking at or possibly gonna look at in the future is that deduction that people can take, not on income sensitivity, but based on their income in those brackets and the house site value.
I think the original,
I guess what I'm trying to look at is, okay, right now, you're showing us that it would be a $2,760 increase, right? So I guess I'm wondering, and would hopefully in the end be able to compare what a certain property tax owner with an income level is paying now, and then what they would pay under the new system.
And yes, and that's the the direction of the modeling. So I know that when the administration presented their proposal, they presented preliminary modeling that showed the average, that essentially showed this under their proposal.
And Jake's chart was green and red, and sort of where, folks were paying more or less. And we can sort of flash that back up maybe as well.
And so my intent or reasoning for doing this is the administration's proposal is considered revenue neutral because they estimated the exemption to be the same cost as the current property tax credit system, which means there was none of this lower iteration of lowering rates and then recalculating liabilities and then lowering the rates again, and none of that. And so my first step was, what if it wasn't revenue neutral? Where is sort of our starting point? If there were to be no income sensitivity, how would it shake out?
Okay. Thanks.
And I think the sort of prompt that sent Julia down this path that she's taking us now on was to ask her to model what it would look like to use the mechanism that the administration shared with us, but with the same composition of folks.
Playing common house fire.
The same composition of folks paying a similar tax that they're paying now. We don't want to, I personally feel uncomfortable having, low income people pay more in taxes than they are now, right? And so there's some iterations, there's some segments of the proposal that came from the tax department that's true. And it was because of sort of the assumptions that they modeled with. I don't think it's because they were particularly sort of stuck on that piece of the proposal. And so doing a little more work on it to see if we can change sort of who's paying and who's not, using the mechanism that they offered.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I can throw into that mix as well.
Yep.
But the other concern that we may have also is the towns that are going through reappraisal, correct? Because that may change things that much more. And right, I mean, for some.
I'm gonna have Julie answer that one because she's good at answering that question.
In theory, it shouldn't matter.
Oh.
CLA.
And the reason is because of the CLA. So what we're looking at here is equalized, which means that we're assuming that this house site is 100% of fair market value. As you know, the CLA is aiming to adjust it to 100% of fair market value compared to when it was last reappraised. It's a statistics exercise. And so the extent to which it gets it right depends on the area and the appraisal and all of that. But in theory, because we're looking at equalized value, it shouldn't matter where in the reappraisal process they are.
Thanks. Well, just to elaborate, didn't Sharon even say that in Burlington, now after the reappraisal? They went.
Some people talk that way.
She also said over
I don't know what
5
else to
years.
say.
So she said over 5 years,
For
it went
tax bill.
from 7,900 to 12,700. So that over 5 years is a key
Okay.
thing,
Thank
yeah.
I think that from the not talking about this morning's testimony, but just the general conversation of reappraisal and then this big fear that the tax bill is going to go up because of the reappraisal may in part stem from, that your property tax is calculated by multiplying not you, but like a person generally knows that their property tax bill is calculated by multiplying their property value by their tax rate to get to their bill. So when you have a reappraisal and all of a sudden your value goes way up, it's natural to assume, oh my gosh, my value is going up and I'm applying the rate. And so now the bill is going to go up. When in reality, in a reappraisal, the value is going up, which means that the rate no longer needs to compensate for the fact that the value was too low before. So often the two pieces of the seesaw are ignored and it's just the one side of the seesaw that's focused on. When in reality, it's more one of these.
CLA will adjust the rate down
Precisely.
with the higher net.
Yeah, I think the challenge in the last few years though has been that you get a reappraisal, because this happened in South Burlington, it's happened in a lot of towns around us where you get a reappraisal. And in that 1 year, it's fine. You end up with a CLA of like 113 for the first year. But market value is going up so fast that within 2 or 3 years, you're suddenly back down at a CLA of like 77. And now you have this higher property tax
So
value.
what I'll offer is that that's then included in the full statewide grand list, and so the statewide rates go down as a result of that.
Yes. But that's, I mean, that's where you're seeing Karen or somebody like her having her tax bill go from 7,900 to 12,000.
No, it's spending that causes that to happen.
But to Representative Burke, like the spending is go like, you can't pretend that the spending.
No, I'm not pretending the spending's not
Yeah,
going
no,
up.
no, but like it's part of the whole ecosystem.
Okay.
Sorry.
I am deeply hopeful that we are going to do such great work on reappraisal that the CLA will become a thing of memory.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about equalized. So that's what we're seeing here. This is looking at that average difference, when homestead and non-homestead rates have been, uniformly lowered. Essentially what I'm trying to get at is like, if we are trying to hold certain groups harmless or not change certain groups' liabilities, what is the ballpark that we're working within? So then I said, okay, well, what if we were to model this 153 million only lowering the homestead tax rate and not being applied to the non-homestead tax rate? We see that more homestead taxpayers would see a decrease in liability than the previous slide. The intuition still remains the same. To Rep. Brannigan's point, of course, those above 115,000 would also be seeing decreases in liability, but it's just not reflected here because we don't have the data. And so again, what we're seeing here is that the lowest, with the removal of income sensitivity, it follows the intuition. The lowest income groups would see the largest average decrease in liability, while those with higher incomes would see decreases in average liability. Interestingly, I think, you see that there are certain groups in here who are technically income sensitized. They receive a property tax, may receive a property tax credit because they fall within the parameters of being able to calculate a property tax credit. But what we're seeing is that even though they may fall within those parameters of having a property tax credit, they would have a lower liability if there were just to be no property tax credit in general. Which is a really interesting, it gets back to that balloon that we're always talking about. You push it here, it comes out over here. So I think I thought this was really interesting. Should I keep going?
Please do.
So then I performed the same exercise again, but I said, okay, we saw the largest increases at those circuit breaker folks, the lowest income households. And I was squeezing the bubble in different ways. So then I said, okay, the next way I'm going to squeeze the bubble to create a different kind of baseline is, what if we were to maintain that income sensitivity for the households up to 47,000? So essentially say, we're not touching what's happening up to 47,000. We're going to remove the property tax credit once you hit 47,000. Not a policy proposal that I was asked to model, instead a modeling exercise to help understand the levers that we are.
In order to get to the question that I asked you, you have to do these two steps first, essentially.
Exactly. And I haven't been able to get to the question that Chair Kornheiser asked because I have been deep in the weeds of this modeling, which is why I'm presenting.
And this is not, it's really, really helpful for us to see your process. I think I'm glad you did not get there yet. Because you would never take us through all this stuff otherwise. You would just tell us the end result.
Usually, yes. So, okay, so then I said the income sensitivity up to the 47,000. So before we get into the tables again, reminder, circuit breaker, we've got a property tax credit that has these certain provisions for households with household incomes up to 47,000. We call this the circuit breaker, the super circuit breaker. And essentially what it means is that within these different baskets of household income, a household can only pay a certain percentage of their income towards the education property tax. It's also a credit. And it's included in this income sensitivity and property tax credit. So the provision of this, the full income sensitivity for the households up to 47,000 is approximately estimated to be approximately 70 million for fiscal year 2025. And this is 70 million of the 153 million. So not half, but close to half of that property tax credit is going for the 40 up to the 47,000, right? But we have this 70,000 and then it's 83,000 for households above, or 83 million, sorry. Getting excited. So this was the process, and this is where we get into this iteration. So we said, okay, we're maintaining the income sensitivity for households up to 47,000, which means that property taxes could be raising 83 million less than they're raising under current law. And this 83 million could be going to homestead, could be going to non-homestead, could be going to both. So to calculate this, I conducted 3 steps. First, I said, okay, we're going to take the 83 million that we're not paying out in property tax credit. We're going to put it back to tax rates. Then we're going to calculate the new liability, like we did in the previous exercise, under the new rates. And then we're going to compare the current law liability to the new liability. I artificially stopped the iteration process. I said, we're going to do 1 circle and that's enough. Which is one of the reasons why this is very much a preliminary. Because essentially what I did is, after solving all of this, the circuit breaker would be less costly than it is under current law because the rates would be lower. So we wouldn't need to be providing so much credit. So it'd be 70 million under current law, but then when doing the re-rates, it would be 66 million. So then I could have taken the 4 million and put it back to tax rates and then, but I didn't. So using that process, I did the same 2 exercises that I did to understand what it would look like with the removal of income if there were to be no income sensitivity. And so first I said, beyond the circuit breaker, no property tax credit. We're going to use that 83 million to uniformly lower homestead and non-homestead taxes. And what we're looking at here now is a shrunk table, and that's because we're not really changing the liability of those of most households under 47,000. So for simplicity, I said, let's just look at 47,000 up to 115. And what we see here is that now the largest increase, that bubble now squeezes to the group. The biggest squeeze is to that group between 47,000 and 75,000, because they would have received the most generous, likely the most generous property tax credit. So again, for instance, reading this one here, that household income group between 47,000 and 75,000 with an equalized house site value between 25,000 and 300,000 would see an average increase to their liability of 1,630. Not their total liability, an increase.
Do you have another grid that shows what the average liability is today? So what we can look at is 2750 on that $75,000 to $90,000 line. What kind of percentage increase would that be? Is that,
That's a good question. I don't have that in here. I could follow up. I think that Jake may have had that in his.
I was trying to see Jake, but I couldn't see it, yeah.
Okay. But yes, that's a good question. So that's what we're looking at here. Again, the circuit breaker folks generally would be held constant. The only change is that those circuit breaker folks or households, I should say, who have more property value or are hitting that maximum credit, they may also see a decrease in liability because they have those lower rates. And then I did this again, but looking at homestead, this is, I'm sorry, I was doing these slides, slide titles kind of late last night. This is not the right slide title. What we're doing here is we're reducing homestead property taxes only. We're not reducing, but everything else is right. It's just the title. So this is another way to look at it, using it only to lower the homestead rate. And again, what we see here is that the bubble squeeze, that increase is not going to be as great as compared to the prior slide because the homestead rate is lower. But we're still seeing that most significant increase in property tax bills for those groups right above the circuit breaker. Couple of final notes. My next step, or the next piece that I went to that I'm not ready to present any tables about yet, but I'm ready to talk about, is so the administration's exemption has this homestead exemption that's tiered based on income, and it's calculating the exemption as a percentage. And when we think back to those pillars, the 6 principles of a good tax system, or pillars of a good tax system, one of them is simplicity. And often I'm asked, like, what if we just made this really simple? And so another bound that I push is, what if instead of doing a percentage, we just said like a flat dollar amount? You know, like, not a percentage, everybody gets X number of dollars off of their house site value. And I said, what would that need to be so that there would be no change in liability up to 90,000? And it's a very crude way of looking at it, but it gets that sense of intuition. And what we find is the exemption would need to be approximately 300,000 for there to be no increase in average liability. So you'd have a whole slew of groups that would be, their house site value would be fully exempt if you were to do just a flat dollar exemption rather than a percentage or a tiered approach.
That would not, then, if they earned more than 90,000, they would still get that exemption.
I didn't even go
Okay.
up to 90,000.
Just thinking, if somebody has 100, then they still get the exemption on the first 300,000, if that was the model.
I was just trying to see, like, how big of a dollar exemption would we need to be putting in if everyone was getting the same dollar exemption to essentially hold everybody at least harmless? And it's essentially exempting a lot of groups, just entire house site value.
Thanks.
Oh, I don't know why my arrows aren't working. Final slide. I think we've talked about all of this, but these were some of the things that I was thinking about when doing the work and when trying to think about how I was going to talk about it to all of you. We've talked about it's complex and iterative, that policy changes impact the size of the credit, which then in turn impact the tax rates, right? So there's sort of this circular thing that we're working through. And that it's that pushing of the balloon, changing the credit here is going to impact liabilities and other parts of the income and house site distribution. And then the last piece is that we get back to that trade-off between simplicity and fairness that we talk about a lot when considering changes.
Thank you. Looking forward to even more next time. That was a really helpful ground playing. Thanks. So by way of a fairly invented segue, I will say that this conversation about the CLA and the confusion of the CLA and the changing property values and the inconsistency of that is one of the many reasons we are looking at our statewide property assessment system and updating it. And Kirby has a new draft of the bill that we looked at last week after some conversations with the tax department and some emails that I'm sure everyone's received that takes a slightly more stepped approach to the work. You want to join us? Thanks, Kirby.
That does very clear.
I know, but it was, a little ad hoc, I guess I'll say.
Love it.
And folks, we might or might not get through the whole new draft before lunch, I'm not sure.
Okay. Good late morning to everyone.
Late morning to you.
Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council. So yeah, I spent most of my day yesterday throwing together new drafts. Here, it's not going to be perfect because it was quick, but it's something.
Like thrown together.
Thoroughly researched, and
I like to be self-deprecating for some reason, so. Yeah, anyway, I'm gonna give you an overview of the language before we go into it so that you can get the bigger picture of what's trying to be accomplished by this version 2 of the reappraisal bill.
Oh, sorry, one more before you do that. But because of this week is always a very difficult week to schedule witnesses for because school vacations happen this week. One of my grand hopes is when Education Committee recommends a statewide school calendar, it will line up with town meeting week. Just to make my own personal life easier. And so the tax department is not going to join us. We were originally hoping they could join us today. It has nothing to do with anything they think or don't think about this. They're just not available to join us today. So they're going to join us to comment on this draft after town meeting break because they're not available this week. Okay.
Okay. So the big picture here. First off, in this version of things, PBR would directly handle mass appraisals. There would still be regional assessment districts, but they would not have staff. They would just be jurisdictional. There would be a PBR district advisor responsible for each district. And one of their primary jobs is to contract and organize for mass reappraisals for that district. So taking that responsibility off the plate of listers. With no RAD staff, we're keeping the lister system the same in this, other than handling the mass reappraisals. So general grand list maintenance, current use, et cetera, all of the duties the listers currently have would be in place except for being primarily responsible for mass reappraisals. The appeals are still, the appeal system is still changed a little bit. Under this version, lister grievances stay the same as current law. And in the case of if there's a mass reappraisal year, it would not only be lister grievances, but it would also, a contracted assessor would be involved in those grievances for those years. So once every 6 years for a district. So that's mostly the same as current law. And then from there, an appeal from the lister grievances would go to a regional board of civil authority, which is a new entity, a new concept. in a nutshell, we'll get into the language of it and go into detail, but in a nutshell, this regional board of civil authority would be all the municipalities from within a single regional assessment district would send one representative from their board of civil authority to this regional one. Pretty similar to how regional planning commissions are done with one representative from each municipality. And they would handle the property valuation appeals only for that district. So the municipal board of civil authority would keep all of its same duties that it has under law, except the local board of civil authority would not do property valuation appeals anymore, lister grievance appeals. I have a meeting after this with Tucker Anderson from my office, who is our expert in municipal law in this area. So just to let you know, I need to learn more about boards of civil authority to make sure that we draft this in a way that works and is gonna work as intended. So there's still work to be done on that, just to flag that. From the Regional Board of Civil Authority, the next appeal step would be to a PBR hearing officer, but like we talked about last time, it would be a Department of Taxes employee. It would not be the current system, which are part-time independent hearing officers. So we're keeping that the same as the last draft for that step of the process. And then after that, it's court, which is current law, and stays the same. So those are the major changes. And then we'll go through the details now.
And tax feels like this is more in keeping with the intent that they described in their report to us. But they'll speak for themselves the week after next.
So I have kept the legislative intent section from before the same. Just to reiterate what I said last time, I'm primarily responsible for this section to be here because usually I'm not a huge fan of legislative intent, but in this case, this system, the structure that's being set up, it leaves a lot of those nitty-gritty details to PBR, which is because there's a lot of decisions to make with standardization and data collection, a lot of decisions to be made with IT systems to be used, and to put all of that in a statute would be kind of irregular. So in my view, the way that this is structured and in this type of case, legislative intent section is really important for PBR in the future to have guidance of what the General Assembly right now, putting this in the law, what they're hoping to achieve, and the Act 68 report was hoping to achieve. And so it's putting that here. So the purpose in my mind of this existing is to guide PBR when positions change, when there's new people in all the seats, that those new people all understand, because it's here, what is intended by this system and the structure. So that's why I included it. And I've seen some testimony, this is just me speaking for me because I feel responsible for this, that it never crossed my mind that putting this in here would be perceived as criticism of the current system or listers as they are. Do not cross my mind. This is to guide PBR. And I would not make the claim that this legislative intent and what's listed here is something that listers aren't doing or trying their best to do already. I want to clarify that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will admit to not having contributed to do what I was volunteered to do, building out the rest of the intent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's the same, and that's to guide PBR, like we just said. So here are some of the changes. Regional assessment districts, as I mentioned before, they're staying the same, county-based in this version, except no staff here. It's just a jurisdictional thing. They're set up the same as before. Grand Isle and Franklin would be together, and Essex and New Orleans would be together. And just to remind you from what I said last time, those are put together because they're near each other, and they need to be together in order to get to the parcel count to hit that mass number of parcels to make it economically more worthwhile to do mass reappraisals. So that's why those are together like that.
And there's both the sort of contracting efficiencies, and then also, if folks remember that long statistical presentation we had, you want a certain scale in order to have good statistical accuracy on sort of the cluster of properties you're valuing.
I'm sure, do you want questions now or do you want to wait or what?
No, let's do, if you want to ask a question now, let's ask a question.
No, just one quick question. Is there a definition of what fully reappraised means?
I put that fully reappraised in there to try to specify that we're talking about mass reappraisals, totally open to a more precise term for that.
Okay.
But that's why I use fully reappraised to contrast that with your year-to-year ground risk maintenance. But if there's a better term that we think is less ambiguous, then yeah, please let me know. Subsection C is changed a lot because this was before about the assessment supervisors, which are not a thing anymore. So instead, we're putting into place what the district advisor's roles would be here. So it says, PBR shall assign one employee to be a district advisor to each regional assessment district, who shall facilitate contracting for full appraisals of the district and ensure municipal grant lists are maintained accurately and are consistent with other regional assessment district jurisdictions, including the valuation of utilities, the application of property tax exemptions, and the correct standard classification and calibration of parcels. Part of the goal of this is to have standard data collection. And the way I conceive of it is like there has to be a single person who's making sure that it's standardized. So this language puts that on the district advisor and gives them the ability to say, we want this type of property to be classified as residential. And to let a lister know, it's like, I know you may not agree, but this is how we're doing it everywhere else, and you need to make this residential. And like, so they would be in the position to making those shots in this.
And long-term, the goal is to midterm, some term, I have no idea time anymore, but to align this with new school districts. But since that's all working in parallel, there might need to be sort of a marriage of language at the end.
Just clarification. So when we're talking about consistency with other regional assessment jurisdictions, including the valuation of utilities, so like a wastewater utility would be worth the same amount in Essex and in Washington.
The same, well, there's sections in law about how utilities are to be done. And it's just to make sure that's consistently done across. And it's actually in the draft here, and we'll get to it because it's in current law. And because I drafted this in a way to repeal the chapter on appeals, and for some weird reason, the way utilities are valued is in the appeals chapter. Interesting, probably some interesting story about how that came to be. So I've had to move that with the appeal stuff. Okay, so more about the district advisor's role. District advisor may order a municipal lister or assessor to modify a municipal grant list as they see fit to uphold any requirements issued by PBR or required by law. That's what I was describing before about calling strikes and such.
Mhm.
And
Sorry, again, just making sure I'm understanding. So the district advisor has the authority to just unilaterally overrule a municipal lister?
if it comes to that is what that provision is meant to do, because if that's left ambiguous, then we might
Yeah.
end up without standardized data, which is part of the point.
Yeah.
And then the district advisor shall,
I think Charlie had his,
No, I was
oh,
trying to notify.
oh, thank you.
So
Representative Brannigan.
Are they county employees or are they state employees?
they're state employees, they work for PBR. There's currently 6 district advisors already who help municipalities.
Under current law.
Under current law, well, it's right now it's less formal than what this is doing. Like PBR just has 6 employees that are district advisors whose job is to help listers and assessors do their work. They do trainings, all the stuff in the law about PBR will do this to help towns, do that to help towns. On the ground, that most of that is done by district advisors who are themselves valuation experts, who I'm guessing most of them used to be a lister or assessor or both at some point. There's 6 of them now, but there would need to be 12 because there's 12 districts here. So that would be a change. PBR would need to double the amount of staff for that to handle all these districts.
And about these 12 districts, somewhere along the way, I heard that Grand Isle and Franklin County were going to be joined for the sake of this new school plan we have. Are those the 12 districts you're talking about, school districts?
No, this is right now structured as county-based. The chair mentioned a moment ago that it's possible to switch to it being more school district-based and what the jurisdictions are. But this is just county-based, and the counties were chosen the way they were based on the number of parcels to get to more than 10,000 parcels in a district, which is
I see.
and so Grand Isle has fewer than 10,000. And I think Essex has fewer than 10,000. So those had to be put with other counties.
All right, thank you.
And as I said before, as the school district boundaries become clearer, it might make sense to align those. And Jake said in testimony at some point much earlier in the session that one of the reasons for the administration's proposal around the size of the school districts was actually grand list balance and capacity in each of those districts. And so there's an alignment there, but that lots of decisions need to be made outside of this room, and we can only control what we can control right now. So going with this, if other decisions get made to realign, it might make sense to do that.
Is this in our bailiwick really, or is this GovOps?
This is very much our bailiwick as it was last session when we did it.
But
GovOps will get a visit.
I need to ask the question again on the number 1 section. As the district advisor sees fit. Again, it's a pretty big broad statement, as sees fit. And is there any appeal process?
No, this would be, this would be this language could be modified because it was data collection was what I had in mind. But I was not thinking that there would be a scenario where a district advisor would say, change that value. Because that's just not my understanding of how it would work. But if there's concerns that something like that would be done, and that's not the intent of the, policy that the committee wants, we can massage this obviously, and we can try to specify what exactly we want the district advisors to be doing.
And we haven't gotten to the appeal section yet.
But in general, no, this would not be something that could be appealed. This would just be between the lister and the district advisor, and the district advisor saying, we got to do this for consistency. You got to change that. So anyway, subdivision 2, there were some questions about what the district advisors currently do. This is basically captures a lot of what they currently do. They provide training and technical support to municipalities in the district. In this case, there's no districts, but they do that. And administrative support to the Regional Board of Civil Authority, which is something we're going to get to later. And then we have the standard guidelines and procedures. I've left this in from the previous version of things. It's not as necessary now because this will be PBR employees guiding mass reappraisals. But I left this in for now, thinking that it may be something you would want to have every one of the 12 district advisors to be working off the same playbook, so to speak. And this would be PBR putting that out there, like this is the playbook that we having the district advisors apply. So that's something that could be handled internally by PBR, and a lot of this does not necessarily need to be in the law, but it's there for now, and it does capture the things from the Act, 68 report, for what PBR thought was going to be important for this new reappraisal system. There's also subsection B here that I left unchanged, but it would be something that I've flagged for you to think about. This is leaving it up to PBR to decide what the schedule would be for the mass reappraisals that are done. You could choose to specify here, for instance, there's 12 districts, it's every 6 years, so you could specify 2 districts every year or have a reappraisal. I wasn't sure if you really wanted to do that because there might be other reasons why PBR would not want to do that. For instance, Chittenden County is really big. Maybe they want to do just that one in one year and maybe 3 of the smaller ones in a different year. So this allows that kind of flexibility, but it is a policy call for you. Subsection C here is what I mentioned before about the utility properties and what's done under current law. It's been moved here as an appropriate place, or at least more appropriate than the appeal section. And this is current law. All of subsection C and the subdivisions under it are the process for valuing utilities.
Yeah, before we move on from that, I think I'd be interested to know what PBR's thoughts would be on what a schedule might look like, because if the point is consistency, leaving that ambiguous.
On
The scheduling for the every 6 years and how they would, want to structure that schedule. I think if we're trying to achieve consistency, having that.
how they would, I actually don't understand your question, I'm sorry.
So we're just talking about like, maybe PBR wants to do Chittenden County 1 year and do just that 1 year.
Okay,
I'd be interested to see what their thoughts are on
Okay,
the schedule.
great, okay, yep.
I definitely don't want to put words in their mouth. That was an example.
That's why I want to hear from them.
Yep.
Because if we want to be consistent, I think that we should not leave it ambiguous.
Mhm. And that brings us to the Regional Board of Civil Authority, which is a new section here. So we'll run through what this construct would look like. There will be 12 of them. They would overlap with the regional school districts, as I mentioned before. Each municipality within that district would be able to send one of its Board of Civil Authority members to the regional one. I included here a term of 3 years. That's basically a placeholder, so you know. I had considered maybe putting it as the legislative body of the municipality can decide the term or leave that open. And again, I haven't had that conversation with Tucker Anderson. This is not my municipal law. I dabble in it a lot, but I don't want to be the final word on that. So I need to have some more conversations about some of these things. But for now, it says 3 years in there. I left the concept of filling vacancies. I don't know if we need to put that in the law, if that's handled without specifically calling that out. Another thing I need to talk to Tucker about. So there's just some details here about process on the municipal level. But 3 years, all representatives can be compensated. That's something that happens with boards like this, where if the municipality decides to reimburse their representative for their work, they can do so. I know like Montpelier chooses to do that sometimes, but I don't think it's done that often. And then the regional board of this is a typo on my part. It should not say regional board of abatement. It should say, and this was not cut and pasted. I literally wrote abatement. I have no idea why. Regional Board of Civil Authority shall elect an executive board of 5 members, facilitate meetings and oversee operations. This is based off of some of the things that regional planning commissions do. If you have feelings about the structure of this, this can be changed.
And I just want to name, I think there's a real tension at this sort of moment in Vermont history between, there's a lot that municipalities don't have the capacity to do right now. There's, we have created these extra regional groups to do planning, to do waste, to do communications unions, to like all of these things. We don't have county government in a real way. It seems like it's going to be quite a while before we figure out what a fully regionalized structure might look like for emergency services, right? And so I think there's a real tension between sort of giving more power to the state than people are comfortable with and creating brand new entities. And making sure those brand new entities have the capacity they need. And so I think this approach tries to minimize that, but it's never going to be perfect. And so just sort of want to name that. This is, and, you know, all the feedback will be welcome from all the field, including, sort of as tax continues to work on this too.
So the way that this is written up, the Regional Board of Civil Authority again, it would elect its own executive board like a regional planning commission does. And so you'd have some leadership within that regional group, and they would elect their own people within. Because you got to have somebody to run the meeting. So, you know, you've got to have certain roles that are done in a formal meeting like this. So that's why that's included there. And then the subsection D, I added to specify that basically the Vermont Administrative Procedure Act would apply to these hearings. I'm open to feedback about whether that amount of formality is what you have in mind or not. And yeah.
This appeals for the whole the Regional Board of Civil Authority. So if each town is sending a member, how many towns? What does that look like? Is that 15 towns in each?
I was the Montpelier member of the Washington County, basically, Regional Planning Commission, and there was 20 something of us.
Yeah.
It's a large number.
It's a big hearing. Yeah. Okay. But think on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, like the unique K things, the regional communications union district and the planning commission is 55 towns.
Yeah.
And the waste management district is 55 towns.
It's a lot.
And it's an interest, and so this is something that sort of tax was thinking about there's a real balance also between sort of making sure that whoever's hearing the appeals has both the sort of remove and qualifications to be doing it in an objective way that also is just like, it's kind of feels uncomfortable for a lot of people. And we spent a lot of time on this last year. It feels uncomfortable for a lot of people to be asking for like tax relief from their neighbors, right? And so there was a balance between that and not wanting to make it like quasi judicial and too formal, right? And so it's open to figuring this out, and yes.
Yeah, I think generally preferable to start with a model we already know, that people are familiar with. It could then be modified rather than starting something whole new. I mean, that gets us into a big can of worms, I think. So the way you suggested it, Kirby, I think is a good place to start.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Okay. So that was the setup of these new regional boards. And then we get into the appeals structure. This is based off of current law, except it's based off of the appeals that are currently going to local boards of civil authority. And so it's restructured so that it goes to the regional board instead. The intent, which I haven't worked out all the language for, as I mentioned, is to keep the other duties that boards of civil authority do the same, but taking this, the property valuation appeals off that. So within 30 days following notice of a person agreed by the listers, which is a change from the last one, because the last one had the RADs and their staff do grievances. As I mentioned, these are lister grievances now, or going back to what current law is for this version. And so it's lister grievances, and the appeals are brought to regional boards of authority. This is all, I'm leaving the law the same. I do want to note that in taking the old law and moving it over, there's a concern legally with playing around with words for a long existing law. And so I try to keep it, and it's a led council practice, we try to keep things the same because we don't want to inadvertently signal to a court that we intended a policy change when really what we were doing was we were trying to rephrase something. And that's a concern that could happen. So throughout some of this language, it's old fashioned language that I don't love, but I also am a little bit scared to tamper with it unless we really are intending to do some kind of overhaul. So we've got the Board of Civil Authority to schedule their hearings to proceed just like the Board of Civil Authority would. I did write this so that, because we're talking about a big board now, that they have, I wrote a majority vote. They would have to majority vote on a written decision. That's something that it could be 2/3. It could be structured some other different way. But the way this is written, at least half of them, or more than half of them, would have to agree on the wording and the decisions made. It's not specified who of them would have to write this, but I imagine that's something that would have to be worked out internally.
And does this match current law for an existing BCA?
I based this off of the appeals to the BCA, and
Okay, great.
it wasn't, this part wasn't directly, that's why I'm calling it out. This wasn't directly stated before, but now it is.
Thank you.
But like current law, 3 members of the regional board would be necessary to do an inspection. That's true for local BCAs under current law, 3 members. And then all of the stuff we went into before about inspections and, an appeal will be considered withdrawn if an inspection's refused. And that's all current law and the COVID stuff. In case of emergency, if you remember. Subdivision 4 here on page 7 is current law. If the structure and procedure is not substantially complied with, then it ends up going in favor of the taxpayer. Same way as it would under current law. And then we have appeals that are not from a grievance, and that's current law. That would normally go to the Board of Civil Authority or could. And so we're just adapting current law there. This is the process under current law for when a person's appealing, but it's not from a grievance because it was at a different time of the year that some adjustment was made. And all of this is going to the regional boards. And I definitely welcome, Department of Taxes feedback on whether they think that what we have here is going to allow them to follow the same processes that have been followed. So I believe so, but I haven't heard feedback on that. And that brings us through the regional boards and what we have for language for that for now. The next section in this is appeals to the director or to Superior Court. This is mostly unchanged except for changing references from the assessment supervisor to Regional Board of Civil Authority. So just like current law, you can either go to a PBR hearing officer or you could go to court after the Board of Civil Authority. It's all the same, except in this case, it's coming from the Regional Board of Civil Authority, and it can go to either a PBR hearing officer or the court. But in this case, the PBR hearing officer is structured differently, and it's a full-time department employee. At least one full-time department employee, by the way. I would flag that. We don't need to make any changes to the language, but it's under this language, it's possible for if the department decides they need 2, as long as they can make that work with their budget, they could have 2 or more. So this is all virtually the same current law, except for the things that I mentioned. Now we have the reappraisal section of law where we have, and tell me if this is what you want or not. But, I wrote this so that PVR will receive the $8.50 per parcel fee for reappraisals because they'll be in charge of doing those. And then there's a $1 per parcel fee farther down that's for help with the equalization study that would, I think, under this version, stay with municipalities and for their, basically for their grand list maintenance work.
I think we are gonna need to get some testimony from municipalities and the league about how much they're actually using for grant, how much of that money they're using for grand list maintenance versus putting into some sort of escrow account to save for the full scale reappraisals. And so maybe those dollars would need to shift. And then in terms of paying PVR per grand list parcel, just seems like a really weird way to budget state government. And so like likely that would just become part of PVR's budget and we would not need to have like an item in a piece of statute about that.
And yeah, and so one reason why I tag right here, this maintenance of the grand list, because under this system, PVR wouldn't be doing that for the most part. So it's a little awkward. And it's also, we need to, take into account that municipalities will be doing this and it's not free.
And so it might, the other dollar amount might need to go up to account for sort of the difference, because I don't know how they're actually balancing that out on the ground.
But under this proposal, wouldn't the municipality continue to do sporadic reappraisals as opposed to a big mass reappraisal? I mean, you've got
Yes,
things going on and they're gonna be doing 10 a year
And
or
that's, and
15 a year.
that's what we were just discussing, how accounting for their need to have some funds for that.
Because
The way that this is drafted would not have those funds go to them. So, yeah.
Will you scroll down though, because there's the other maintenance
Yeah.
dollars.
So I went ahead and kept all of the like PVR ordering, reappraisals, et cetera stuff, kept that repealed because PVR will be doing it, so not needed. And then we have the
Oh, sorry, I thought something was, so there's is it $2 per parcel? Where is that?
it's farther down. in the-
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, great.
It's $1. It's for help with the equalization study, so we're about to get to it. So this is the equalization study section. Let's not forget that a big part of this was changing the dates for the grand list. And that's still changed. January 1 grand list date. And I did not touch current law where it says the commissioner shall pay each municipality the sum of $1 per grand list parcel municipality for services provided to help with the equalization study. So stays the same in this draft.
So if there's not gonna be a common level of appraisal anymore, why does there need to be an equalization study? I mean, what can they do if we can't adjust that after doing the equalization study?
So it might take about a decade for everything to be updated enough for the common level of appraisal to be done away with. And the equalization study will need to happen definitely in the meantime and maybe after. And so that's something we would have to talk to tax and
So you're still saying through this, there would still be a CLO?
until like they finish the full round, which I imagine will be about a decade.
Okay, thanks.
This is a long road we're on here.
Have you heard testimony of places that don't have CLAs?
Like other states?
Yeah, or any jurisdiction, even, I mean,
I
I just thought it was universally done.
think it's usually done slightly differently. And it has very little impact other places, right? Compared to the wild thing we have here, yeah.
Is that because it's not part of like, in other places, not part of the algorithm for getting?
I think we can take more testimony on, but other places there isn't a statewide grand list, so it's less important. And other places, it's an adjustment to property values often, and not an adjustment to rates.
Tax rate, yeah.
Okay, so
Senator Beck really loves talking about it if you want to catch it.
She does like talking about ceiling. Okay, so the next section we have is the grievances process. This is partly in here just to show you that it's being left the same. But there are some little grammatical type changes, so there's a reason to leave it also. But it's staying the same as current law. And the dates are staying the same, which I had changed before, but we heard from PBR that for these dates, they want them to actually stay what they currently are, because part of the benefit to changing the grand list date from April 1st to January 1st is that you have that larger window for lister grievances and for this process. So we're keeping those deadlines the same as current law, but by changing to January 1st, we're allowing a lot more time for that. Repeals, still repealing from Act 68 the changes that will be made, just again to make sure that they're not going to undo any changes done in this bill. And there's more work to do on that. And as I mentioned before, the appeals chapter has been kind of reincorporated into this language, and so it would be repealed in this draft. And then there's the transition language, which I understand is a work in progress, but just flagging that for what provisions would you like to deal with reappraisals in the short term? How do you want to handle PBR handling ordering new reappraisals in the transition period? What to do about ones that are already in place? And so
And PBR has very strong opinions about all of this.
right. So, but I haven't heard direction specifically from them about whether this works for them or what needs to be changed. But I presume that there might be, this is not exactly what they might have in mind. I did change this for this draft, that moving the money for reappraisals, this is written to move it to the RADs. This is, I now changed that to moving it to PBR.
And we might just leave it with municipalities in order to make everyone feel better about the universe. Yeah.
Right, I mean, there's probably gonna be a lot of discussion around that, because again, some of those funds can be used for other things, whether it's computers or whatever.
Yeah. And the grand list maintenance will still be needed, so, yeah.
Still have some conforming changes language that I changed a little bit based on this new structure. I don't.
To where?
Never mind.
Okay.
Oh,
Is Darth Vader in here that they didn't want you to ask my question? So yeah, so conforming changes. Hopefully we're not gonna need this at the end, but there's a lot of work to be done on my part to pull all this together from existing law. But the intent will be for me to go through Title 24 and the BCAs under this version of things, and to make sure it's clear what they will be handling and what the regional BCA will be handling, as well as changing the dates and terminology as needed when it comes to the new January 1 date, and any references to PBR hearing officers and things like that. So a lot of work to be done there. I'm glad I didn't do that work previously for the old version, because it would have been for nothing, because we're looking at.
Conforming changes should really be at the bitter end. Thank you. So folks, we're gonna need to wrap up for the day. I'm looking forward to just sort of reading this with my own focus brain. I hope you all are too. And then we are hearing from a bunch of folks from the field tomorrow morning on this bill. I'm really hopeful that I know it's just 24 hours, but folks are going to have a chance to really read this new draft before they testify and offer sort of constructive suggestions on ways we can tweak things to better meet intent. And with that, we are going to stop for the morning, see everyone at 1:30 in the committee room. Thank you very much. I don't know if you're saying goodbye or you're raising your hand, Jim.
It's just a compliment to Kirby on something that I didn't understand previously, which is you're not changing language when it's unnecessary. Lest a judge somewhere think we were making it some judicial, some legislative intent, which was not what we're doing. I wouldn't have been on that to save myself